Now, we don't want to just do this in a very basic way. We want to have a lot of control later in After Effects. So in addition to the normal image sequence, I'm going to output various layers, break down the image into different layers, and also output some masks so that we can selectively affect different areas of our image later in After Effects. So this will make more sense if I just show you. If I go to the Output tab to start with, let's go for a resolution of 1920 by 1080 and a frame rate of 24. We are outputting all the frames. Let's go to the Save tab, and the format I like to use is PNG 16-bit. This is what I use for like 99% of my projects. And we can specify a output path. Let's create a new folder for our main sequence and call it main sequence. I'll just call it main S, okay? And in here, I will just save this as main. So this is for our regular image, and I will always render this out as a backup. But what I actually make use of in After Effects are multi-pass layers. So if I go down here to multi-pass, for this particular project, we are going to export the ambient layer, the specular, reflection, and atmosphere. So you might be wondering what they are. So let's untick save up here so we can just output to the picture viewer. And we will see this broken up into those 4 layers I just showed you. It's attempting to render the entire sequence. So I will stop it after just this first frame. Actually, I don't have to. I can just go to layer over here and single pass. And now I can click these layers we have just enabled in the output. So atmosphere will contain just the fog. Reflection, as the name suggests, are the reflections in the scene. Ambient contains any object with a luminance channel, in this case just the galaxy. Specular, actually I thought I had real lights in the scene, but actually we don't need it. You can see it's completely blank, so we are going to not include that. If I press escape, that's going to stop the render. And let's go back here. We don't want to output anything unnecessarily, so let's delete that. Okay, so actually we're just going to use those 3 layers. In addition to separating our image into the different layers, we also want to create masks for the various objects in the scene. If I start with the character, I'm gonna go to render tags once again and compositing, and there is a tab here called object buffer. This is what the masks are called in Cinema 4D. So let's enable this. And then let's go to the columns and let's enable buffer number 2. So we just make sure that each buffer contains only one group of objects. You can of course combine things if you want, like we just did there. All of these will be combined into group number 2, but these are all pillars. I'm just separating the objects in groups. So for the galaxy in the distance, I will put another compositing tag there and enable buffer number 3, and then that leaves just the floor. So let's go to render tags, compositing, and this is going to be in object buffer number 4. We could take this even further and do things like put the the side bits in their own buffer too. In fact, I will do just that. So that's this sides object. This will be in number 5. So with that setup in the compositing tags, we need to go to our render settings again, multi-pass, and let's add the object buffers. And however many you set up here is how many you will need in the render settings. So we have 5. Let's select all of them at once by holding Shift and just selecting the first and last one. And then we just need to make sure these IDs go from 1 through to 5, just like we set up in the project. So let me go to output, current frame for now, and I am still not saving anything here because I am just testing to see if my layers have been split up how I want. So once again, if I go to the layer tab, let's go to single pass. We have our 3 image layers, and then on top of that we have these object buffers or masks, which we can make use of in After Effects as the luma mats and track mats to only affect those parts of the image. So exporting your image this way just gives you a lot more control in After Effects later on. I'm happy with how this is going to output. If I now re-enable the Save tab, let's also make sure that our multipass image, which is all of these, are going somewhere. So this will be the same settings as above, PNG 16-bit. We just need to also save this into a different folder. So I'm going to call this multi2, and let's save that in here as simply multi. So we have our main image sequence rendering to this folder, and then all of these various multipass layers rendering to a separate folder. Once I am happy with this setup, I can either render to picture viewer, which just renders in this window here, and let's make sure that we are doing all frames, because I have done that before where I thought I was rendering an entire animation only to return and realize I outputted a single frame. And of course this would take some time, so this is something I would recommend you do overnight perhaps, or if you're heading out somewhere for the day, you can leave this rendering on your computer. You can of course do things like lower the anti-aliasing settings. That's going to speed up your render, or lowering the resolution too, but in general, rendering in 3D is a time-consuming process. Another way to render is to go to the top part of our menu under render, and let's add this to a render queue. This is the one we have just added, and this will show up here in this queue, and you can line up several renders if you wanted to, and then when you're ready to go, just start rendering, and then this will start processing in the background. It gives you an estimated time remaining based on how long it takes to render each frame, and once that first frame finishes, you can actually double click to view this in the picture viewer. This is that first frame we'll be cutting out later because it always renders incorrectly because of that fog glitch, but subsequent frames will render correctly anyway. But that's it. That is how we output our image sequence from Cinema 4D. With our animation finished, we need to bring all those images into After Effects, so let's see how that works. So the process of importing our files into After Effects goes like this. You want to be in the Project tab, double click anywhere in this window, and this will open up the Import dialog. And from here we can just choose any frame from our sequence. This is the main sequence right here. Let's say I pick the first frame. If I pick PNG sequence and click import, After Effects is going to automatically detect the rest of the sequence, and this will come in as an animation. So if I quickly just scrub through this, you can see how that looks. So that's the main image sequence, but what we are actually going to use to build our final look are those multipass layers that we outputted from Cinema 4D. They were all rendered into the same single folder, but we can still separate them out quite easily just by selecting a frame from each particular sequence. We may have to scroll down and find the rest, but it's all in here. And this is Atmos. We also have reflection, and I think those were the 3 main image layers, and then the rest were just the object buffers. So if I just find object buffer number 1 there, scroll down and find number 2. It's a bit tedious perhaps, but as you can see here, the whole process of importing 6 or 7 sequences really won't take that long in this case. And I'll just grab the final buffer, And if we quickly just look through these are the object buffers or the masks. Once our footage is in After Effects, we want to make sure that it's being interpreted at 24 frames per second. So if I right click any sequence, let's go to Interpret Footage and Main and assume a frame rate of 24. And now you see it's updated over here and we have the new duration of 17 seconds and 7 frames. I can then right click this once again, Interpret, remember the interpretation, and then right click the rest, Interpret, and Apply. And now all of these are the same. Another thing to keep in mind here are the color profiles in After Effects. Let me use the Atmos Pass as an example, and this is the one that holds the fog layer. If I bring this down into a new composition, the color profile which I use is sRGB, and that happens to be the same color profile which is on my monitor. So whether I use the display color management over here, or if I turn it off and then go to project working space, it's set to sRGB also here because my monitor is the same. It appears the same whether I use it here or load it separately in here. Now, you may use something different. For example, Adobe RGB is a popular working space. If I click OK, there are no changes because I am still overwriting with my display color management. But if I untick this, now you see this appears a bit different. The Adobe profile in particular is supposed to have more range, I guess, but I don't really like the look of it so much. I much prefer sRGB. It seems to have more saturation and a bit more contrast. So this is what I would suggest for your project too. Go to the project working space and use sRGB, and also make sure it's 16-bit because our renders from Cinema 4D were also in 16-bit. Okay, we are now going to build the final image in After Effects. We're going to take all those layers that we brought in from Cinema 4D and blend them and use various effects inside the program and see how that works. So this is what we're trying to build here, and we're going to combine all the various layers that we rendered out and see what we can come up with. So starting with the reflection layer, let's drag this to a new composition button down here, and let's get the ambient pass, which is gonna contain our galaxy. Set that to screen on its blending mode. And by the way, if this menu isn't there, press F4. It cycles through between this menu and this one. The Atmos layer, this is the fog, also set to screen. So very quickly we now have we've reconstructed our image using those 3 layers. Let's see what we should do next. I think there's light rays on the galaxy. These were done by taking the ambient layer, duplicating it, and on the top layer, let's go to Effect, Color Correction, and Tint. I'm going to just solo this so we can just see that layer. Let's map on the tint effect, let's map white to orange, but like a deep orange, so about 20 degrees on the hue slider, and then max brightness and saturation. And then if we go to Effect, Blur and Sharpen, we want the CC Radial Fast Blur effect. Set this to 90, and the zoom will be set to brightest. So we now have these bright spots emitting the light rays. Okay, let's bring this back. And very quickly then we now have the light rays effect on the galaxy. We can sort of choose the direction by moving this center point. I'm just going to have this right there somewhere. So the rays are going up. If I zoom in, this may be a bit too pointed in some areas. So let's go to Effect, Color Correction, or rather Blur and Sharpen once again, and a fast box blur, and I'll set this to 2 on the radius. There's a weird dark edge. We just need to repeat edge pixels, and that's going to fix that. Okay, and that's it really for that effect. quite straightforward. Next up, we can do the glow that we see on the pillars, and then these are the side bits. We can do this by taking the reflection layer, duplicate this, so press Ctrl and D. Let's pre-compose the second layer, call it glow, move all the attributes into the second layer, and then click open. And in here we want to isolate the effect to the pillars and the side. We don't want this to be on the floor. So what I'm gonna do is, if I take the mask for the pillars and then the side section, let's set the blending mode of the side section to add, so that we combine those two masks together. I'll pre-compose these two and call them mask number 1. And then on the reflection layer, I will go to track matte and point to mask number 1 using the Luma matte mode here. So now if I toggle transparency, you can see we've taken out everything except for the pillars and the side section. And then I will take a adjustment layer and put a levels adjustment on this. Just push it to the right and create some contrast. I just want the bright yellow and orange parts of this, so we need to take out some of this blue. If I get a hue and saturation control in color correction, let's go to blues, desaturate, and put the brightness down to make that completely disappear. And just to be safe, let's do the same for the cyans. Okay, let's go back to the main composition, and if I press the tab key, I can just use this node to jump back. So it looks a bit strange in here now. If I solo this layer so we can just continue to work on that alone, I will go to color correction, tint, and I'm going to map white to that same orange color that we used on the galaxy itself, about here. And then the effect in here will be CC cross blur. This allows you to blur, and this allows you to blur either on the x-axis or the y-axis individually. So set X to 50, and the transfer mode will set to add because it's brighter. So now if I bring this back, I want to set this blending mode to be add also. So this is before and after, but this is just on one axis. We want this to go on the other one too. So if I duplicate, once again, Control and D, let's change white this time to be around 300 degrees for the hue, which is this kind of pink color, and then about 60% saturation. And then let's blur in the other direction, so 50 on the Y direction. This time, because it's all a bit too bright, I will set the blending mode to screen instead. But if we just take these two layers, solo them, you can see we have now created this custom glow effect by combining those two colored layers. That is the difference. I think the whole image is too bright right now, so let's go to the original reflection layer, go to color correction, and let's go to levels once again. And I'm gonna drop the gamma here to 0.75 just to darken everything a bit. Next up, we want to just add some detail to the galaxy layer. So this is going to be done by sharpening on the original ambient layer, this one. Let's call this one up here raise, just to differentiate between the two. And this is the galaxy. I will go to effect, blur and sharpen, and unsharp mask. On the first one, let's do a radius of 3. Duplicate the effect, Control and D, and then set the radius down to 1 for like a finer level of detail. So very quickly now we have this just popping a bit more. This is how it is now. This is before. just a bit more contrast. Okay, I like how that's looking. The fog layer seems to have a different tone to it compared to like the reflection and so on. So I'm gonna go to Effect, Color Correction, Hue and Saturation, and then let's just push the hue to the right a bit, so 10 degrees, and I just prefer that style. So now you're seeing the advantage of separating the layers out like that from Cinema 4D. You have a lot of control at this level in After Effects. Our pillars up here are disappearing a bit into, you know, the darkness up there. So if we look at this example, you can see there was a bit of a color difference. Right now, it's all kind of just the same. So once again, I'm gonna take our buffers, let's drag them to a new composition, starting with the pillars, which is buffer number 2. Let's also get the side bits on the floor, which is 4 and 5. And these will be added on top of each other. And let's get the buffer for the character too. Let's just set that to add. Let's call this composition everything, or every mask, because this is kind of combining all of them together. And if we go back to the main comp, I can bring it down here below everything, below the galaxy and all that stuff. Let's create a new solid, and this is gonna be like I don't know, maybe about 210 for the hue, but the brightness will be like 5. So very faint layer, but it's what we need to just create that separation in the background. So with every mask above that, I would change the track matte to luma matte and point there, except it's going to be inverted because we are putting the background in between. So this is before and this is after, and this could be, you know, brighter if you wanted it to, maybe about 10% instead, just to separate the pillars out from the background just a touch. And if you wanted to take this further, you could even have like an image of a star field or something back there, just to add another level of detail. But this is what I did for the original project, so I'll leave it there. And finally, on top of everything, I'm going to create an adjustment layer. Let's go to Effect once again, Color Correction, and Lumetri Color. We just want to warm up the colors. If I go to Basic Correction, let's set the temperature to 40 and the tint to about 10, just for some more purple. I will go to the creative section, just fade this slightly, let's say 10, and then I will also sharpen the entire thing to about 25, just to bring out a bit more detail. So this is the comparison. It's just a bit warmer and a bit sharper everywhere. One final effect on top of everything could be if we go to Stylize and Glow. We want to put the threshold all the way up to 100%, put the radius to 100%. But instead of using the original colors, I'm going to go to color A, and this is going to be that same tone we used for the pink about here, and the same orange color also, maybe desaturated a bit this time though, so about 80%. And let's choose A and B colors. And this is a very subtle effect. We can maybe make it more obvious. It's really just making the center part brighter and then just adding a slight diffusion glow to the brightest parts of the image. But that's just a small extra. See if you can do other things to create something a bit different. I'm gonna press spacebar here to do a full preview and see how that looks. Okay, and that's it. As you can see, plays through fine. The light rays up here actually react to the pillars, so that's some nice extra movement there. And when it gets to the end, it just jumps back to the beginning and we have our nice seamless loop. Okay, and the project is finished as far as what we need to build and, you know, the compositing in After Effects. In the next section, I'll show you the best output settings for your animation. In this lesson, we're going to do our final render out of After Effects, and then I'm also going to show you the best output settings in Premiere Pro for Instagram and YouTube. Let's take a look. The render settings from After Effects are very simple. We just go to Composition, Add to Render Queue, and the preset I use is the QuickTime Animation preset. So if you go to Format Options, select the Animation Video Codec. If this isn't there on Windows, just make sure you have QuickTime installed. Reopen After Effects and you'll be able to access that particular codec. Anyway, this is going to create a very large file which contains a lot of color information, so that if you want to make further changes in Premiere Pro, you'll be able to do so without degrading the image. So that's what I recommend, and you would just output this to somewhere on your hard drive. And then in Premiere Pro, because I've already done this, I'm just going to bring in the render I did before, and I'm just dragging this from my other screen. If I import this, I can right-click and New Sequence from Clip, and in Premiere I can just play this out on this timeline. Now, if you recall much earlier in the classes, I mentioned something about the first frame being identical to the last one. So if I go to frame 0, move forward 1 frame, I'm going to split this clip right here. If I get the razor cut tool, just cut that off, and I can delete that first frame. Let's move this now to start at frame 0, and if I copy this, move to the end, I can snap this to the end of the first clip. Anyway, this is the kind of thing I would do when I'm editing, and maybe adding some music to this. And then when I'm finished, I go to File, Export, and Media. And here I have some presets I like to use. So for YouTube, I just use the H.264. And for the preset, there is actually a YouTube preset. So you can do 1080p, but I actually like to do the 4K Ultra. I always post my 1080p videos upscaled to YouTube. They end up playing back at a higher quality than if I just upload at regular 1080p. And I do the same for Instagram, except I then just have to make it square. So if I take this height, make sure that it's not linked to the width, so that if I paste it in here, it will change my frame to a square. And then in the source scaling, I will change this to scale to fill. Instagram still scales down the video, of course, but I just find this seems to help with the video quality a bit. Anyway, that's it. I will just export this to somewhere on my hard drive and then post it to those 2 places, Instagram and YouTube. Okay, and that's it. Hopefully that was easy for you guys to follow. If not, if you run into any problems in particular, you can use the community section below, and I check that regularly. I will be able to answer your questions, and if you post screenshots, that makes it even easier, and other people can maybe benefit from the answers I give there too. So please feel free to use that section, and I will respond as soon as I can. Beyond that, I would recommend trying out different things with this style. For example, here's an animation I did with a different galaxy and different colors and so on. So this is what I would recommend you guys try to use what you learned from this class and apply it differently to your own projects. Anyway, my name is Don Mopasi. You can check out my work on my Instagram and my website, and I'll put those links on the screen now. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.